As everyone knows by this point, the Sheriff's Office, along with the United States Marshal Service Fugitive Task Force, was involved in an officer-involved shooting last night at the 16995 area in St. Johns County. Investigators spent the entire night there processing that scene, which is now nearing completion. At this point in time, we have determined that 2 U.S. Marshals on the task force were shooters involved in this, and we have one Deputy Sheriff, Mohammed Taboulik, who was a Deputy Sheriff with us. He's been a Deputy Sheriff with us for several years, and that individual is on administrative leave, which is normal protocol and is certainly not in any way punitive in his career path. Those individuals currently have this investigation ongoing with our Major Crimes Unit, and that investigation is continuing. We have for you identified the individual who was wanted out of New Hampshire. Mr. Hobbs wanted for an aggravated sexual assault on a child under the age of 15. He also is on probation up there, although I don't have all the determining factors to give you at this point in time for what that was in reference to up in New Hampshire. We have no local record of this individual here, no past contacts with him in any way. It appears that the U.S. Marshal Service was tracking him down the East Coast towards Florida, where he was discovered in our St. Johns County. The operatives involved in the task force knocked on the door. They asked that individual to come out. He did in fact comply with coming to the doorway, where he stopped and would not comply further with their commands. There was a period of time, we don't know exactly what that period of time is because we have not interviewed those 3 individuals involved in the shooting at this point in time this morning. But at some point in time, that individual refused to comply with those commands, to comply with the officers and the marshals there on the scene. And at some point in time, he made several sudden moves. This was obviously something that 3 individuals simultaneously perceived as a threat, and each one of them fired their weapons multiple times. So we do have a good collection of the scene. Forensics is now moving forward on all of that processing, and of course interviews will begin. We did have several eyewitness accounts of individuals who were at the hotel, and so we will put all of this information together. We will package it up, and it will go to the state attorney's office, who is the deciding factor as to making that decision if any one of those 3 officers or agents did anything that was inappropriate or improper.
Just for our audience now watching, can you establish whether or not the suspect was armed, or as any indications as to why the officers fired?
Yeah, absolutely. There was no weapon found at the scene, but the indications are that he made several sudden moves after a period of time of not complying. So we have to get into the mindset of the officers at the time, what their perceptions were, and we have not had a chance yet to interview those individuals. And so once that occurs, we'll know exactly what those sudden moves were, and we'll be able to articulate that, again, not to the general public, because that's part of the ongoing investigation at the immediate level. Certainly in time all that will be known publicly, but it has to go to the state attorney's office so that they can look at the fact finding that's going on and make a determination if in fact this shooting is justified.
Why was he down here? Why St. Augustine? Why St. Johns County?
Yeah, the information that we have is that this individual had learned up in New Hampshire that there was an impending warrant for his arrest. He was already on probation for several other issues. And so, like many other criminals, if you go back in time, I think even this year, if you recall, there was a fugitive, I believe it was from Minnesota, I believe that was the state, who had fled from a homicide, an arson, and a homicide scene, and we located him walking down the beach in St. Johns County. It is not uncommon, and it is not unheard of for criminals who are fleeing other states to end up in Florida for whatever their reasons. Maybe they want to come to this area and visit, because they feel that there's going to be an impending loss of freedom or something else that they may have intentions to do to themselves. And we see that pretty often, unfortunately.
But there weren't any other contacts that he had down here that you know of?
Right. At this point in time, we've had no other contacts of what he was here for, except that he was fleeing the area that he was from.
He was alone at the hotel, right? He was by himself, but
yes.
Were others in danger around there? Were there people staying next door?
This all happened in very close proximity to one another. Imagine that you're at a hotel room door. There were 3 officers, law enforcement officers, who engaged him, gave him commands, and 3 that fired. Those were the closest proximity individuals. All the other officers would have secured a perimeter to ensure that no one else got into that area while they attempted to make a lawful arrest on him. But unfortunately, he did not comply, and again made some very sudden moves that 3 officers all perceived to be a threat at the time.
Were any of the officers on scene wearing body cams?
No, we do not have body cams here. I cannot speak for the U.S. Marshal Service. I don't know what their protocol is.
Do you know if Hobbs has any other aliases or nicknames, such as the Whip? Does that sound familiar?
I've heard that he has nicknames. I'm not exactly sure what they are at this point. That would probably come from case files from the New Hampshire area.
What about this particular hotel, the Howard Johnson? Has it had other incidents before involving criminal activity?
I would certainly have to check. I mean, our 16 and I-95 hub, if you will, is a very busy location. We often find stolen vehicles from other areas. We encounter wanted persons from other areas. We see some criminal activity. We see shoplifting. We see a number of criminal issues that occur. So that's not to say that at some point in time we haven't responded to the hotel for something that is not within the control of the hotel, but certainly criminal activity. But I would have to research that to determine if there's been any other, significant criminal events.
And it's a location for that kind of activity, that interchange, just because it's 95 and a road with hotels and businesses?
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly there's a lot of transient traffic that comes through there. From, imagine I-95. You have everyone from anywhere in the country coming through Florida at any given time for whatever their reasons are. Some of those individuals are for criminal activity, be it drug trafficking, be it human trafficking, be it stolen cars, or what have you. And so we run that percentage, if you will, that sooner or later we're going to encounter something that the individuals will engage us in some way.
I know
Did
it's
the
early,
Marshal's
but
office contact you and say, hey, we've got this going on here? How did that all come down?
Did the who?
The U.S. Marshal's office.
Yeah,
Did they say,
absolutely.
hey, we've got something going on. We need your deputies.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
what?
That's why we had both uniformed and non-uniformed deputies at the site. The U.S. Marshal Service and our agency work together on many cases. Many of those don't ever become public knowledge. They're just dealt with, and we move on with an arrest, and that moves forward. So, yes, there was communication prior to this. We were there on scene with them at the onset, again, to have uniformed and non-uniformed personnel on property.
thank you.
Chuck, I do want to ask one last question, and that is about if he stood there for a little while and he did not have a gun, and he made motions, would this be considered, or could this be investigated as suicide by cop?
Well, certainly the suicide by cop is an option. Now, everything's on the table at this point in time. We've not ruled anything in or out, but certainly, those three individuals perceived that what he did was a threat. Exactly what that was, we don't have sworn testimony to at this point in time because the interviews have not been conducted. That will occur, and so certainly that's an option. We have to look at his background. Obviously, what his possible mental status was. We'll have to do that by talking to people who know him. And again, he's never been here before that we know of. So that'll all have to occur across many state lines, and so all that is ongoing. It becomes very complex when we start moving across state lines. And again, we have to work with both the officials in those local jurisdictions in New Hampshire, as well as the Marshal Service. What did they know? What information were they working on? So obviously, we hate to see any circumstances like this occur. We know that this individual has family members back in New Hampshire. One of our priorities was to have law enforcement reach out to them. We did not want them to learn of this scenario unfolding through any other means besides an official notification. But all of those conversations will be ongoing to determine, did he have any other avenues that he may have been approaching, and since law enforcement made contact with him, was that his final decision? We just don't know at this point.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.